I'm Tom Haviland. I'm a retired U.S. Air Force major. I spent 20 years in the United States Air Force, retiring at the rank of major. I then spent 16 years working with the Air Force as a defense contractor doing electrical engineering work. I have a bachelor's degree from the Ohio State University in mathematics, a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Louisiana Tech University, and a master's in computer resources and information management from Webster University in St. Louis. I was in my 36 years working with the Air Force when it all came to an abrupt halt, Sonia, in the fall of 2021, in October of that year. If you recall, Joe Biden put the mandates on the U.S. military, the government civilians, and us defense contractors, of which I was one, working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, to take the COVID-19 vaccine. And I knew by that time, Sonia, after doing a lot of research on my own, that the shots were not working well. I was looking at actually good data coming out of the UK. Our own CDC here in the US wasn't putting out very good information, but the UK was putting out a document every couple of weeks called SARS-CoV Variants of Concern, Technical Briefing. And this one was number 23, dated 17 September of 2021. And that document, in table 5 of that document on pages 19 and 20, showed hundreds of thousands of breakthrough cases of COVID amongst the fully vaccinated. So I knew by then that the shots were not working. They were not stopping you from catching COVID or transmitting it. I also knew about the Nuremberg Code, and it was, unethical of them to ask you to take an experimental jab against your will. So I decided right there and then I wasn't going to do it. And I didn't, I kind of went out with a bang. There was a three-star Air Force general who sent out an email to the entire base trying to guilt those of us who hadn't taken the shot yet into getting it. And I sent him back an email. And in that email, I said, shame on you. Shame on you for not standing up for our right to decide for ourselves whether or not to take an experimental drug. You chose to spend your time instead trying to guilt those of us who hadn't taken it into taking the jab. Shame on you. And I didn't just send the email to him. I sent the email. I CC'd all 30,000 people that work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio.
Oh,
It's the
wow.
largest single-site employer in the state of Ohio. Yeah. And I knew what was going to happen, Sonia. I got a call from my defense contractor boss, and a half hour later, I was fired from my $165,000 a year job as an electrical engineer for embarrassing this three-star general in front of in the entire base. But somebody had to do it. None of the colonels, none of the generals were pushing back on these unlawful mandates. So I
Yeah.
made my stand, and I'd do it
Yes.
again in a heartbeat.
Yes, you certainly made your stand there, Tom. Could you tell us a little bit about, so you've done these recent surveys which are highly alarming. You've actually completed two, and this is your survey on worldwide embalmers around. So you've got US, Canada, UK, Australia. Could you tell the viewers and the listeners out there what what the survey, what the results were from this survey, and also what did it entail?
Yeah. Uh, First of all, the reason I did the survey is I watched that film Died Suddenly. The day it premiered, it was the week of Thanksgiving of 2022, November of 2022, here in the United States. And to your audience that may not be familiar with it, it's about an hour-long documentary. About half the film is devoted to these 6 or 7 embalmers that are finding these strange white fibrous clots in their corpses. And I was struck in the movie by one particular statement that was made at the 13-minute and 15-second mark in that movie. An embalmer from the state of Indiana, Mr. Wallace Hooker, states that he was recently lecturing at an Ohio Embalmers Association conference in Columbus, Ohio, on the 26th of October in 2022. And he was lecturing to a room of about 100 embalmers. And he showed them photographs of these white fibrous clots, like the ones I'll show your audience right here. He
Mm.
showed them photographs of these. He said, by a show of hands, how many of you are seeing these same strange clots? I've been embalming for 20 or 30 years. I've never seen these clots before. Well, he said the whole room of 100 embalmers raised their hand. Yes, they were seeing these clots.
But
He
there
then
was,
asked them, well, when did you start seeing them? And they all agreed it was in the middle of 2021, which just happens to be about 6 months after the safe and effective injections rolled out. So I thought that was an amazing statement made in that movie, right? Either that statement's true or false. Either those embalmers raised their hands or they didn't. So I
wow.
got up the very next day and I said, I don't think any reporter is going to chase after this story, Sonia. So I decided to call the Ohio Embalmers Association. They're located in Cincinnati, Ohio. I talked to their president, Mr. Dan Becker, their vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, and their secretary, Mr. David Hicks. And I asked all three gentlemen, did you happen to be in the room at the time these embalmers supposedly raised their hands, saying they're seeing these clots too? Well, none of the three gentlemen happened to be in the room at the time. But the vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, who runs his own funeral home in Marysville, Ohio, about an hour north of where I live in Dayton, Ohio, said, Tom, I'm seeing the white fibrous clots too. So I said, wow, this is a huge deal, right? Now I have an official officer, the vice president of the Ohio Embalmers Association. By the way, Woody's now the president of the Ohio Embalmers Association. He said that he's seeing the clots. So he's corroborating the story of these 6 or 7 embalmers in this Died Suddenly movie. So right there and then I decided I needed to do a nationwide survey, which I later then turned into a worldwide survey by including Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand to see how large this phenomenon was. So that led me to the creation of these 2 embalmer blood clot surveys. The results of the first survey that I did, Sonia, had 3 key results to that. Of the 179 embalmers who responded to that first survey, 119 of them, almost exactly 2/3, 66%, said they are indeed seeing the white fibrous clots, or they were through the year 2022. The main consensus of those embalmers is that the clot started for them in the year 2021, which is 6 months after, or when the safe and effective injections rolled out that same year. And the really shocking result, Sonia, was that some of these embalmers were seeing these clots in up to 50% or more of their corpses. They were seeing them in an average of about 30% of their corpses, but some embalmers saw them even more, like I said, up to 50% or more of their corpses. So this is not a rare phenomenon. These clots are prevalent. Embalmers are seeing them all over the place.
What is the length of those clots? So you showed me some pictures earlier, and it looked about 6 inches long, a white fibrous clot, like the one you have in your sort of in that tube. I mean, how long do they go? I mean, do you know?
Oh, they've found clots as long as 2 feet in people's coming out of corpses' legs. There's even been live people who have had these extracted from their bodies. So they do exist. The embalmers, they believe they may be forming not just pre-death but post-death as well. We're not sure about that, but they're pretty convinced they're forming pre-death because they're seeing these clots in bodies that are very warm. They've only been dead for an hour or 2. So there's no way these clots like this could form in just a couple of hours inside a corpse that's just expired. So we believe these clots are causing strokes and heart attacks by blocking, the veins and arteries of their victims.
Right. Going back to that first survey, so what was the time frame in that, the time period from when, it was
conducted? I conducted the survey between December of 2022 through March of 2023. Because I first did the USA and did that in December into January of 2023. But then I decided to do the other countries as well. And I did those primarily in the February-March timeframe.
Right. And 2/3 said, yes, we're seeing these white fibrous clots, and they appeared 6 months into 2021 is when they first started to observe them. Did any start seeing them in 2020?
Yes, there were. There were about 44 of the embalmers that said they saw them in the year 2020, which is interesting, right? That's the year that we had the virus, but we did not have the vaccines yet. So that was interesting. And the theory there is that it's the spike protein. There's a spike protein on the surface of the virus itself. And the scientists that I've talked to believe that spike protein can damage the internal lining of the blood vessels, irritate what's called the endothelial lining, which then triggers a response by the human body to turn fibrinogen that's in a liquid form in our blood into fibrin. Combine that with platelets. By the way, the fibrin's white in color. The platelets are colorless, and they start to aggregate too. They're as triggered by the endothelial lining being either inflamed or damaged. And then there's also this amyloid material, which is AMYLOID, which is basically a fancy term for a misshaped or misfolded protein that is building up. And those 3 in combination, that's what Dr. Ryan Cole believes. And he's looked at it under a microscope. So that's his determination of what these white fibrous clots are made up of. And then they can grow to the point where they either give you a stroke or a heart attack. We all have a natural enzyme called plasmin that's used to break down normal clotting in the body, But if that clot's misshapenly folded, like these amyloid structures are, it becomes difficult for that enzyme plasmin to attach, and then the clots tend to persist. What we think may have happened in 2021, though, with the advent of the safe and effective injections, is that you remember they were supposed to stay in your upper arm and your deltoid muscle,
Yes.
produce just enough of the spike protein to elicit an immune response for just a couple of days to a week, and then leave your body completely. But we now know that's not what happened at all. That injection goes all over your body, turning your entire body into a spike protein factory, and it can do that for months at a time. They found it doing that for months at a time. So the scientists that I've talked to believe that it has supercharged the effect of the formation of these white fibrous clots. So going back to how the survey was conducted, by the way, I used a two-pronged approach when I sent out the survey, Sonia. I sent it out to 50 national, regional, and state funeral director associations, each with hundreds of members underneath it. And in the email was a link to the SurveyMonkey survey. We use SurveyMonkey as the tool to conduct the survey. It was really easy. All I had to do is click on the link, and it was about a 3 or 4 minute survey. 7 questions in that first one, 12 questions in the latest one, and we asked those association presidents to then forward that survey down to their hundreds of members, funeral directors and embalmers that are part of their funeral director associations. And then I also used a bottom-up approach. I sent the email with the survey link directly to over 1,700 funeral homes around the world. I got the email address. It was quite a time-consuming task, but I did that. And, trying to maximize the number of results. We were as unbiased as possible. For example, in the United States, we sent it to as many blue states as red states. I
Yeah.
sent it to states like Ohio, Texas, and Florida, who are red states, But then I also sent it to California, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, states here in the U.S. that are considered blue states or Democrat states. I also, at no point in any of the questions in either both surveys, nor the instructions to either survey, do I ever mention the words COVID or COVID vaccine. I only asked the embalmers, what did you see? When did you see it? And how much are you seeing? So
That's
I tried to keep the survey as unbiased as possible and not lead the witness.
That's
So
brilliant. Yeah, very clever to have done that. Because I was gonna ask you, my question was gonna be, well, did you get any pushback? Did you get people saying, how could I possibly do this survey? What are you implying? Or refusing to do it? So yeah, that's
yeah,
very
despite the fact that I did that, Sonia, I did get pushback. In fact, in the most recent survey, I have proof of that. I know because I sent the most recent survey out on the 8th of December to the whole world using those two-pronged approaches.
right.
And after about 4 or 5 days, I had only received like 14 responses to the survey. And I said, oh no, this is terrible. I was check my SurveyMonkey collectors. They had only 14 responses. I said, I got to do something here. So I called the 30, there were 30 US states, the most populated US states. I had sent the survey to their funeral director associations. So I telephoned each one of them, and I asked talk to either their president or their secretary or somebody else in the office. I said, please, would you please send out the survey forward that to your funeral directors and embalmers in your state that I sent you a week ago? And God bless the Pennsylvania Funeral Director Association, headed up by a Miss Kathy Ryan as the executive director, and her assistant Allison Hinkle, and another lady named Sue in that office. They did exactly as I asked, and they forwarded my survey. And the reason I know that, Sonia, is the very next day I got up and I checked my SurveyMonkey collectors. I had 93 responses, and they were all from one state, from the state of Pennsylvania. I
Wow.
then got up the next day and I had 32 more responses, and they were all from one state, from Pennsylvania. So in 2 days, I had 125 responses from embalmers in a single state, Pennsylvania. So it told me two things. First of all, it told me that the embalmers actually want to tell you what they're seeing in the embalming room if they feel like they have their permission from either their funeral director boss they work for or the state funeral director association.
Right.
But it also told me, hey, I sent that out to 30 state funeral director associations and I only got one state to cooperate. What are the other 29 states doing? They're deleting my survey. They're not even forwarding it down to their active embalmers and the funeral directors. So it told me there's a tremendous suppression going on at the upper levels, not to want to participate in the survey.
So just to stop you right there, Tom. So for your worldwide survey, where you have the US data coming through, That is just from the state of Pennsylvania, right?
No, I did receive 231 responses from USA Embalmers. 128 of them, more than one half, came from a single state, Pennsylvania. I
Wow.
was able to get responses from other states using the bottom up approach by going to funeral homes directly.
Yes.
Some of, and remember, I sent those to about 800 funeral homes in the United States. So probably less than 1/10 of those responded with, a response to the survey. So I know there's suppression going on at the funeral director, funeral home level as well. But at least some of them did get the information to their active embalmers to
Yeah.
participate in the survey. But I
Yeah.
was particularly disappointed with the lack of participation by 29 out of 30 U.S. state funeral director associations. And I also have proof that's happened in other countries too. I got an email back from the um, executive director for the British Columbia Funeral Directors Association and saying that they would not participate in the survey. That one gentleman who runs that organization for the entire province of British Columbia, Canada, including large cities like Vancouver, made a single-handed decision that they were not going to participate in the survey.
Wow.
I also, when I sent the information survey, I sent it to 6 um, funeral director associations within the UK. London has their own. There's a national one. There's a British Institute of Embalmers, for example. I got an email response from the National Association of Funeral Directors of the UK. This is your main organization. And they said they would not be participating in the survey. They said, we'll let the British Institute of Embalmers answer for us. Well, I'd already sent the survey to them as well to get them to respond. But why wouldn't the National Association of Funeral Directors for the UK take just a minute to forward an email that I sent out to all their hundreds of funeral director and embalmer members, asking them to participate, like I said, in this non-controversial survey? It's
Yeah.
just asking embalmers, what do you see and when did you see it and how much?
Mm.
It's perplexing, isn't it?
Yes.
I have 2 reasons I think they may be reluctant, Sonia. One may be that a lot of these funeral director association presidents are funeral directors themselves. They usually elect one of their own to be the president. And the funeral directors, they may not want to participate in the survey because maybe they mandated that all their employees of their funeral home take the safe and effective injection.
Mm.
And they may be afraid to participate in a survey that might prove that there's a link between the safe and effective injection and these unusual clotting issues like these white fibrous clots and micro-clotting, which we'll talk about in just a minute. They know they could be setting themselves up for a lawsuit if one of their employees, say their embalmer, for example, gets injured by the safe and effective injection, right?
Yeah.
Also, here in the United States, 80% of American adults over the age of 18 took the safe and effective injection. Now, there might be a little cognitive dissonance going on there. You may not want to know the answer to the survey if you yourself had taken the injections, correct?
Of course. Yeah.
So, plus, business is good because there's excess mortality, about 10% excess mortality in in countries that have taken the safe and effective injection compared to those that have not, strangely.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Yes.
so business is good. There's a lot of dead bodies these days.
I
Just a
want,
couple reasons.
yeah, no, thank you for that information, Tom. I wanted to discuss it. Um, your results seem to fall into sort of different categories, sort of obviously the white fibrous clots, whether they observed it or not. Then you have the issue of micro-clotting. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in fact, I think now is a good time to get into the survey results. Would you like me to bring up the presentation and kind
That
of
would
drive it?
be fantastic. Yeah.
Um, as I said earlier, I ran the survey from the 8th of December of 2023 through the 8th of January of this year, 2024. And the very next day, by the way, I sent off the results, Sonia, to the FDA, CDC, and NIH. I wanted them to immediately have this in their hands. I sent the results of the USA portion of the survey that I did last year to the FDA, but sadly, Sonia, I never received a response from them during the entire year. I sent it off actually about a week before a meeting they had in late January of last year, on the 26th of January. Their vaccine and related biological products advisory committee met to talk about the safety of the vaccine. And they gave an hour for oral presentations in that meeting last year. And I asked to actually speak at that meeting. They had too many speakers, though. A lottery ensued, and I was not selected. But
Mhm.
I did submit my information in written format, Sonia, and I did get a tracking number from the FDA. So I have proof that the FDA received my information a full week before they had that meeting on the 26th of January of last year. But throughout the year, Sonia, nobody from the FDA, nobody from the CDC contacted me. Quite unfortunate.
Yeah, not a surprise though.
No, not a surprise, unfortunately. So this year, like I said, we ran it until the 8th of January of this year. The first question we asked the embalmers is, how many years of experience do you have? As you can see there, the bar over 20 years is pretty long. So we're talking about seasoned embalmers with an average of about 15 years of experience if you average all the bars together, which is a good thing, right? Because they know what the blood looked like in quite a few years prior to COVID and the vaccines. And then they also know what the blood looked like in the year of 2020 when it was just COVID but no vaccines yet. And then they also know what the blood looks like in the years of 2021 to present when we've had both COVID and the vaccines.
Yeah.
We next asked them, how many bodies do you typically embalm per year? As you see there, the average is about 100 corpses per year. Now, Mr. Richard Hirschman, who I'm in communication with on a frequent basis, he's one of the embalmers that was in the Died Suddenly movie. I don't know if you remember, he was the one that was actually tracking how many bodies he was finding clots in by, he was using a color code on his computer to do that. Richard's a trade embalmer. So he embalms many bodies. Yeah, he actually works for about 12 different funeral homes, and he'll do 200 to 300 corpses a year. So he's probably in that over 300 band there. So he actually will do sometimes 2 or 3 corpses a day. But the average is about 100 corpses a year for all the embalmers that were surveyed. And that tells us that they know what they're seeing, right? They see bodies on a regular basis.
And they'll know when if they're seeing something unusual, right?
Absolutely. And we're not asking them, we never ask them to state why the clots are forming or how they're forming. They're just embalmers. Their job is not to do that. Their job is to get the body ready for a funeral. So, like I said, they can only really tell you what they're seeing, when they saw it, and how much. That's really the only questions they are qualified to answer. So that's all we limited the questions to. So the next question here is, again, we wanted to know here at the end of 2023, did you see the white fibrous clots? And look at that, 197 out of the 269 embalmers that responded to the survey, 73% said they are indeed seeing the white fibrous clots still in 2023, which is kind of alarming because most Americans are about 2 years removed from their last safe and effective injection. Most Americans, like I said, about 80% of Americans took the first couple of injections in 2021, but only about 20% of Americans took the BA4, BA5 bivalent Omicron booster in the fall of 2022, and only about 15% of Americans, adults, took the XBB 1.5 booster that came out this last fall of 2023. So, but yet they're still seeing a lot of white fibrous clots. So then we asked them the next natural question, of course, is, okay, and what percentage of your corpses have these clots? And if you take all those bars and you average them together, including the green bar, where 63 embalmers said they saw none of the clots, you get an average of about 20% of the corpses. And you can see over there on the left, you can see there were quite a few embalmers that saw that, and more than that. There were 48 embalmers that saw the white fibrous clots in 21 to 40% of their corpses. You can see there was 29 embalmers that saw between 41 to 60% of their corpses. But the average is down a little bit from the survey that we did last year. Last year, that average was about 30%.
Right.
But this is not necessarily a vindication for the safe and effective injection. Because as I just said, as you get further and further away from people taking their last injections, you might expect the percentage of white fibrous clots to go down.
Yep.
And as I said earlier, this is a phenomenon that embalmers have never seen prior to the years of COVID or the safe and effective injection.
Right.
They've never seen these white fibrous clots before. The two types of clots that they've always dealt with in the past, Sonia, are grape jelly clots, which look like grape jelly, dark purple color, and they dissolve very easily in your hands, or what's called chicken fat clots, which are yellowish in nature. They're much smaller and they tear very easily. Nothing like these white fibrous clots, which are large and kind of tough and real stretchy, rubbery.
Yeah.
So one of the other phenomenon that the embalmers mentioned to me this year that we did not get a chance to ask about last year is the phenomenon of a micro-clotting. And embalmers don't describe it as this, Sonia. They describe it as what looks like coffee grounds or dirty blood coming off the drainage in the corpse. As they're draining the corpse of blood and trying to get the formaldehyde in, they're seeing instead of nice pure looking blood. They're seeing these, like I said, coffee grounds in the blood. And that's evidence of a phenomenon called micro-clotting, which can be just as dangerous as these large white fibrous clots, because the micro-clotting occurs at the capillary level and can block the oxygen exchange of the lungs, for example, and then the carrying of that oxygen all the way, to all the other major organs of the body, including the brain,
Yeah.
places like your eye, which have very small blood vessels.
And it appears that that 79% said yes to
I
observe,
know, shocking.
and whereas
Two,
with the white fibrous clots, I think it was about 73%.
yeah, so even a higher percentage of
High
embalmers are seeing this
percentage.
micro-clotting phenomenon. Out of the 269 embalmers, 212 are seeing this. So the next natural question is, okay, what percentage of your corpses have this micro-clotting in them? And as you can see, the average there is about 25% of their corpses. 1/4 of their corpses had this phenomenon. And prior to the years of COVID and the safe and effective injections, embalmers would see dirty blood or this micro-clotting in very few of their corpses. I think one embalmer told me that he saw it in the corpses of people that had heavy chemotherapy. But so it was a rare phenomenon prior to the years of 2020. But if you look over to the left there, you'll see there were 58 embalmers that said they saw the micro-clotting in 21 to 40% of their corpses. Another 32 embalmers said they were seeing this uh, dirty blood or coffee grounds in 41 to 60% of their corpses. Even 16 embalmers saw it between 61 to 80% of their corpses. So this is a very alarming phenomenon that's going on.
Yeah, yeah.
Last year, we asked the embalmers about grape jelly clots. So we wanted to ask them again this year. And we asked them what percentage of your corpses have the grape jelly clots in 2023. And if you average all those bars together, you get about 40% of corpses. So that's not necessarily a good thing either. So then we asked them, well, what did it look like in the years in 2019 and prior, which would be prior to COVID and the safe and effective injections? And they used to see clots in 30% on average of their corpses. So it wasn't a terrific rise, but it was still a rise nonetheless in 2023 over the years prior to the pandemic. Again,
It's a
and they
significant.
also mentioned to me, by the way, that they not only do they increase in number, they also increased in their viscosity. They're actually more like grape jam now than grape jelly, thicker.
Right.
Uh, Here's a very unfortunate question. Some of the embalmers were telling me that, Tom, I'm seeing an increase in infant deaths too. This is a very sad thing, right? I guess the good news here is, Sonia, is that 69% of the embalmers did not see this phenomenon, whereas only 21% did. And there were some explanations possible for that. There's a couple. Well, sometimes obviously the body's not presentable when we're talking about a miscarriage or a fetal demise or
Yeah.
stillborn or a SIDS case. Many of the embalmers have commented to me that it seems to be more cremations going on these days of infants. So obviously, if there is any kind of clotting or any kind of issue in the child, that evidence will be destroyed when the body's cremated.
Yes.
I've also been told by some of the embalmers that some of the hospitals seem to have changed their policy, and now they're advocating more to the parents when this tragedy occurs in the hospital that, hey, we'll get rid of we'll dispose of the remains for you.
Right.
So you can imagine a couple in shock. They're getting ready for this happy occasion, then disaster strikes. So they say, "Yeah, I want the problem to go away." So if that is happening, then obviously embalmers won't see the phenomenon if the hospital is taking care of the remains. So we asked the embalmers that were seeing it, what percentage of your or what percent increase in infant deaths did you see in 2023 compared to the years prior to COVID and the safe and effective injection? And the average increase there, if you do not include the 159 bar, that blue bar, so if you exclude that for those, didn't, and include only those embalmers that did see an increase, and you take the yellow bar and average that out going down, you get a 25% increase in infant deaths in the year 2023 compared to the pre-COVID years for those that saw the increase.
Mm.
So still not a good thing. And we know it's been determined, I guess, that the spike protein uh, from the safe and effective injection has been getting through the mother's breast milk right into the child.
Well,
I
I've
believe
looked
they've
at,
also
yeah.
found cases of it being found in the placenta. After
Yep.
the woman has birth, they found the spike protein in the delivered placenta.
Yep.
So this could be, devastating if the spike protein is getting through from the mother into the infant. Just a sad thing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to stop you there, Tom, but I've written quite a lot on this, on looking at the safety update reports that BioNTech submitted to the European Medicines Agency. And there's so many cases of infants being exposed transplacentally or via the transmammary route, via the breast milk. So, and a lot of these alarming cases which I've written on. So, yeah, very
I know
disturbing.
Dr. James Thorpe has also commented, he's an OBGYN, very famous,
Yep.
about just the astronomical increase in miscarriages and stillbirths over the last few years. The last question we asked Sonia dealt with age stratification. We did not get a chance to ask this last year, and we asked the embalmer. This was the only one question where they were allowed to select multiple answers. We wanted them to select any age group where they saw increases in either the grape jelly clots, traditional grape jelly clots, the white fibrous clots, or the micro-clotting. What age groups are you seeing that in? Now, I wasn't too surprised here that the longest bars, the most embalmers, saw the increases in the older age groups. You see that 66 to 80-year-old bar
Yep.
where you see 157 embalmers, and people of that age are already starting to have problems with cholesterol and plaque building up in their system. But take a look at that 36 to 50-year-old bar. That's
Mm,
a pretty long bar. 89 embalmers said they were seeing increase in clotting in year 2023 compared to the years prior to COVID. And that's a little alarming to me. And it actually seems to dovetail pretty nicely with Edward Dowd's data. He's
yep.
done, looking at insurance company data, both death and disability. He's
Yep.
seen a tremendous rise in death and disability for 36 to 50-year-olds who you usually don't associate with having strokes or heart attacks. And that usually doesn't happen to somebody until they get in their late 50s, early 60s, or later. So that bar distresses me quite a bit, Sonia, that 36 to 50-year-old bar, like I said, and it seems to dovetail nicely with the insurance data collected by Edward Dowd.
Yep. Certainly does.
So in terms of overall presentation, just a quick review here. In 2023, the embalmers are still seeing these white fibrous clots. It's still an issue. They used to never see these things. Embalmers with 20, 30 years of experience have never seen these white fibrous clots before until the year 2020, and most of them not until the year 2021. And they're seeing them in over 70%, or over 70% of the embalmers are seeing them in an average of about 20% of their corpses. This issue of micro-clotting, which the embalmers describe as coffee grounds or dirty blood, was not a big issue prior to COVID. Only
Mm,
5%, of corpses contain this. Now there's close to 80% of the embalmers, 79%, they're seeing this phenomenon in an average of 25% of their corpses. The grape jelly clots are still an issue as well. They've gone up from 30% of corpses pre-COVID to now 40%, and almost all embalmers see the grape jelly clots. About 20% of embalmers are still seeing this an increase, or are seeing an increase in infant deaths, and that increase is about 25% in 2023 compared to the years before COVID. And the embalmers are seeing an overall increase in clotting in all age groups, with the most notable being in the age groups 36 years old and up. So as I mentioned earlier, I immediately sent this information to the FDA and CDC, begging them to investigate, especially the possible link to the safe and effective injections. But I'm not holding my breath, Sonia.
yes, yes. Thank you so much for your extensive work and research into this, Tom. I have to ask you, what made you decide to do this? Obviously, you mentioned you saw the Died Suddenly documentary. Was that the sort of catalyst for you to embark on this project?
That was, I saw that movie, and I wanted to know whether the 6 or 7 embalmers in that movie were a bunch of kooks or whether they were telling the truth.
I
And
see.
really, the only way to do that is to poll the rest of America or the rest of the world to see how big this phenomenon was. Now we have about 200 embalmers from around the world that are saying, "Yes, I'm seeing these phenomena." So they're corroborating those 6 or 7 embalmers and died suddenly, and also uh, the people of the world deserve to know, right? And they obviously deserve to know whether this is being linked or not to the safe and effective injection. It may
Yeah.
help them in their decision whether or not they want to take any more of the safe and effective injection. What was interesting is, Sonia, at the very end of the survey, we actually had an optional comments box. We allowed it was optional. The embalmers didn't have to put anything in there if they didn't want to, but they could elaborate a little bit more about their what they're seeing in the embalming room if they wanted to. And what was interesting is, even though in the survey, nowhere in the survey do I ever mention the words COVID or the safe and effective injection, quite a few of the embalmers responded in their comments either implicating or
Yes.
defending the safe and effective injections. So let me read a couple of them to you. Here's one from the state of Ohio. I found it interesting after the COVID-19 shots were administered, the increase of the white fibrous clots increased significantly. You can tell who took the shots versus who did not. I refuse to call it a vaccine since it does not prevent transmission or spread of the virus. He definitely had an opinion. Here's somebody with an opposite opinion from Pennsylvania. As an embalmer for over 20 years, these type of clots have always existed. This topic is politically inclined, in my opinion. COVID is real. The vaccine is necessary. This all needs to stop. As in, I need to stop doing my survey. You know, what's interesting about that comment is the there's been discussion about whether the clots are forming pre-death or post-death, or whether they even exist. It's hard to say they don't exist when I can show you a vial of them.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So some of the embalmers have claimed that they've always existed. Well, that's hard to prove as well, because if you go back and look in the medical textbooks, you'll see lots of photographs of the grape jelly clots and the chicken fat clots that I described that embalmers have been seeing, but you won't see these. You
Yeah.
won't see these in the medical textbooks anywhere.
Yeah.
So that are claiming that these always existed, it's hard for them to prove that.
Yeah.
Here's
I
a
mean,
couple more. Yeah, go
yes,
ahead.
please go ahead. No, no, go, please go ahead.
Okay. Here's one from Minnesota. When I do get white fibrous clots, it's typically only one or two per body. I had no clue what they were and thought they were very strange looking. I typically have to use my forceps to pull a clot out from the jugular vein so the drainage can continue.
Mm.
I'll read you one more here. This is another one from Pennsylvania. Embalming has become much more difficult in cases where the blood has much more micro-clotting, and these white blood clots are appearing. Some white clots are 4 to 10 inches long. Seems to be a quick onset of clotting, or already clotting is present in the bloodstream. Most cases we receive are usually removed from the hospital, nursing home, or residence and embalmed within an hour or two from the time of death without refrigeration. But definitely more abnormalities are being seen in the blood during the embalming process. As we talked about earlier, what he's getting at here is there's controversy about whether these clots are forming pre-death or post-death.
Right.
The embalmers that I talked to believe they're probably forming both pre-death and post-death, but they're definitely insisting that they're forming pre-death, because as I said earlier, they're picking up bodies that, as this gentleman said here, only an hour or two old, and they're still finding these clots in them. So
Yeah.
that to me is pretty strong evidence that they were happening
I,
before death and are the cause of these strokes and heart attacks and all this died suddenly that we're seeing happening.
well, I was going to ask you a question. Where in the body are they mainly finding it? I think when I was redoing a little bit of research before we even spoke, was it coming from the neck region, or where
Well, they
mainly?
suspect they're happening all over. You know, like I said, they've actually pulled some from extremities, from like legs and things like. But you're right; it's hard to tell sometimes because remember they're flushing the blood out and the embalming fluid in.
Don't know
So
where it's
it
coming
so
from.
they'll find them at their injection site points, and the main injection site point that embalmers like to use is the carotid artery in the neck. We asked this question in our first survey: what are your favorite injection site points? And the most favorite answer is the carotid artery, followed by the iliac artery down in the pelvis region, which then runs down into your femoral arteries in your legs. So they obviously they're finding the clots the most in the neck region and in the pelvis region as they're being flushed out. Now, sometimes they'll actually have there'll be a blockage in an extremity, so they'll have to do another injection site point somewhere else in the body, and then extract the clot before they can further proceed and get the embalming fluid in. In fact, they're a little frustrated right now because embalming used to take about an hour to an hour and a half to do a body. Now it's taking sometimes 2.5 to 3 hours to do a body if they're riddled with these white fibrous clots. So it's made the job a little bit tougher for the embalmers to do.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such, there's so much proof, there's such a strong, it seemed a strong correlation, right, between these safe and effective injections and what we're seeing, these white fibrous clots. Because I mean, why would they lie, right? Why are they going to
Yeah.
do your
There's no incentive to
survey?
lie. In fact, we allow the embalmers to answer the
Yeah.
survey anonymously because
That,
they're skittish because they see doctors in the medical system getting their licenses pulled, their
oh,
certifications taken away if they say anything negative against a safe and effective injection. So they don't want to rock the boat for their funeral home director or their, but God bless them. Enough of them answered the survey to give us good, solid data. And we're fortunate that they did so because they're revealing something to the world that needs to be known and now
yes.
needs to be looked at by the FDA and the CDC. We're unfortunately, are very quiet about all this.
Yes, yes. No, this is real solid evidence here. And I understand, is it Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Ohio, has picked up on your results? Do you know what's going on with that?
Actually, she's from Georgia. Yeah, I've asked, in addition to sending the results of the survey to the CDC, FDA, and NIH, I CC'd some important people over here, like Steve Kirsch, who runs the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation, Dr. Peter McCullough. I've sent my information to Andrew Bridgen,
Yeah,
your member of parliament.
yeah,
I've sent the information to Dr. Joe Ladapo, the Surgeon General for the state of Florida, who Ron DeSantis' state, who is actually suing Pfizer right now, or
yeah.
recommending the pulling of the injections off of the
Halt.
shelves due to the adulteration of the product with
Yes,
the
yes,
plasmid DNA and the SV40 issue.
yeah.
I've also sent it to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Edward Dowd. All these people have my information.
Have they
Naomi
responded?
Wolf.
Have they responded to you?
They've responded with thank yous, and yes, it's just more information that can be used as evidence
Right.
that the FDA and the CDC are not doing their job. They're falling down on the job and looking into this and determining whether or not the safe and effective injections are actually causing these unusual clotting issues.
Yes, yes. Yes, no, thank you again. Thank you again for doing this. I mean, do you have a personal story in this? Is there a reason? Obviously, you've seen the documentary, but I mean, do you know people who've been injured? What's propelled you to put so much time and commitment into getting all this data together?
I have family and loved ones who have taken these injections, and
Mm,
I can't prove it, but I have a younger sister who developed breast cancer shortly after taking two safe and effective injections.
right.
And
Yes,
there's no history of cancer in my family, breast cancer.
yes, yes,
So yes, yeah. But like I said, I do it out of curiosity too. The world needs to know, right? We all need to know: is there or is there not a link? If the FDA and the CDC prove that, hey, we did our own survey and there's not a link, okay, then let us see the data. Prove it.
yeah,
But investigation needs to be done because there's only really two things that have changed over the last 4 years, and that's the virus itself and the introduction of these safe and effective injections. And both of them have one thing in common: they both produce spike protein.
yes, yes, absolutely. Do you have, I know we touched on this a little bit briefly about the protein, the misfolding, and that potentially that might be causing it, because I have done some investigative work on the frame shifting going on,
Mm-hmm.
and you have these unintended mystery proteins being made, which are not the vaccinal spike protein. Essentially, it's something else. And so I've done quite a lot of work in that area. And would you say that that's a contributing factor here? You've got the
I
spike.
think that is an excellent candidate. I agree. I've read that paper as well. I think it came out of Cambridge and Oxford,
Yes,
and they were showing that our own ribosomes have a difficult time sometimes reading the modified
wide.
RNA strand coming
Yes,
off from the safe and effective injection. Right? They've replaced the uridine on
with
the
N1
strand with
C.
pseudouridine. Right? And so what this frame shifting, what you're talking about, occurs where the ribosomes will accidentally skip one of the nucleotides as it's reading the code, thereby then producing the wrong amino acid, which then in turn produces the wrong protein, which turns into these nonsense or aberrant proteins that could be misfolded and build up and be the cause of what this amyloid material is that are part of these white fibrous clots
Yeah,
and also contribute to the micro-clotting issue. So absolutely, that's one of the candidates out there. Yeah.
yeah,
Our late Professor Arne Burkhardt also
yes,
had some theories too about how when the endothelial lining gets damaged, if it ruptures, then some of the tissues that are in the inner walls of the blood vessels could also come spilling out into the bloodstream
right,
and cause this clotting and exacerbate it as well. That's
right.
another theory that's out there. So there's multiple theories out there of
Yes.
how the white of the amyloid material is being produced, and I think you're onto something.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Tom. If there's anything else you wanted to add, please go ahead. Anything else you wanted to say or
The
comment?
last thing I'll say is, unfortunately, Big Pharma's not stopping.
Mm.
They're producing new mRNA-based injections using the lipid nanoparticle technology for
Yep.
things like the shingles, the flu, uh, RSV, etc. I think Moderna's got like 40 uh, vaccines in the pipeline to bring out over the next few years. If this technology, and I say if this technology is indeed the cause or one of the causes of these unusual blood clotting issues, then you as a citizen need to protect yourselves, because I
Yep.
don't think that our governments, I'm not sure that our regulatory agencies that are supposed to be out there protecting us are doing their jobs. So you're the last line of defense. You have to say no to these injections if you believe that they're causing damage to you.
Mm.
That's
Thank,
it.
thank you so much. Thank you, Tom. It was a pleasure having you on. Thank you.